Welcome to the Barrel Aged Faith. Today I have Dr. Pete, the author of the Mount Athos Diet. And Dr. Pete, you just recently also came out with a new book as well, right?
Yes, it was a long time coming, but I had a children's book published with the help of a wonderful painter and artist, and it's called "The Red Dragon Who's Always Scared." Kind of a modern fable. I thought it was meaningful and to the point, and actually the illustrations are beautiful. So yeah, that just came out.
Well, it's great. We'll have to do another interview about that book. But we're talking about your former book, The Mount Athos Diet. And tell my listeners a little bit about your background as a medical doctor and your faith background. I think they'd love to hear it.
No, thanks. Very excited to be on the show, Kyle. Thanks for having me. I was going to say that essentially, I feel like I'm a well-rounded person in the sense that I've been married now since 2007. I have 4 kids, and before I went on to medical school, I actually got an MBA from Penn State. I studied supply chain and flow, and it's interesting actually how sort of meandering education sort of comes back to help you later on, just different chapters. I could expand as to why that's the case later, but and then after that 6 year hiatus of doing business, I realized I really want to be more in that intersection of meaning and money, and I say that pragmatically. Because if I could have just chosen anything, I would have just been like a nonprofit guy doing construction projects across the globe, just drinking water and eating
Mhm.
crumbs and loving it. But that doesn't help much when you have family aspirations and kids, and that's fine because I think men in general are kind of noble bachelors at their best, and we can just live on ramen noodles and just love life.
Mhm.
Um, and just to speak to Jordan Peterson, he always has this, I think, very amazing sort of allegory of a woman on a dance floor inviting you to join to become the better version of yourself. And I do think that sometimes marriage and family life can elevate your ambitions to something a little bit more community minded. Otherwise, we would just eat ramen noodles and breadcrumbs and travel across the world doing sort of random things. So with that said, I had to find a way to pay my bills and still find a job within the concepts or the contours of meaning, and that's where medicine just is the brilliant mix of both. I mean, you can do some really wonderful work every day of your life, and there's always more to do. And at the same time, you can make a good living doing it. And so, never mind the fact that then with that purpose in mind, you can be generous, you can be hospitable, you can serve meaningful purposes with that means. And so, in any case, I would describe myself as a medical doctor who's a little bit entrepreneurial, loves sort of that nonprofit space, but also recognizes that having a family takes a little bit of dinero. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing your background. I love hearing that because, we get so boxed into thinking that like our job is who we are, but there's so many more things about us,
Hmm.
and describing your journey from business and wanting to do non-for-profits, and you're a writer. I mean, you've published a couple
Yes.
books, but
E-
I,
even that even that to some extent, required a certain degree of free time, of space, of financing. And so in a certain sense, I wouldn't call it Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I'm not quite a believer of that pyramid. But I will say, having the foundation in place gives you a little bit more latitude to kind of experiment and take some risks. And one of those calculated risks was developing the Athos diet.
Yeah, well, that's great. So my listeners, we talk a lot about fasting on my show and my articles that I write on barrelagedfaith.com. And so it's not like a brand new concept for people that follow this show, but I don't really have a whole lot of medical doctors come on talking about nutrition and diet and how that connects to spirituality. And I just got done like basically reading your book, and I thought it was phenomenal how you were able to put those two things together, the how God designed our bodies, but also um how our spirituality kind of, that what I call ancient Christian fasting, and that rhythm of liturgy that you see in the Orthodox world and in the ancient church kind of just coming together. I thought it was awesome how you did that.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I am an Orthodox Christian, raised sort of in that ethnic group called Greek. So, as we know, there's a lot of Orthodox Christian groups out there, but they're all the same theology, just a different local language and some custom differences, and that's always been quite unique to Orthodoxy. But since I was 7, I've been practicing the art of fasting, or the ascetical practice of fasting. And you can imagine, as a young kid, where you're not really grasping why you're doing it, but because mom and dad do it, you do it. And if your parents fly and have wings, then you have wings and fly eventually too. And so, but the fact of the matter is, it's difficult to fast in the United States. There's 24/7 access to everything you could possibly want. You could eat every hour of the day, any type of food you want. And fast forward to 2023, with Grubhub and Amazon and the rest of it, I mean, you could have it delivered to your convenience and consume calories all that you want. And there's no wonder that we do have an obesity crisis in the United States. I mean, I think it's always interesting how people sort of describe things, but one thing that hit home to me was they actually described it as a national security crisis in addition to an obesity crisis, because so few people could actually pass the physical requirements to perform their duties as a soldier in the armed forces. So what an idea, that we've become so civilized, I would say, in the wrong way, and so addicted to convenience and consumption that we can't even protect ourselves. So I thought that was very sobering. But
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about that. Like, when something bad happens, how ready are you to like respond? Like your physical health, like how? And we just had a big power outage in my town. That's why our interview was like later than planned. And I was thinking like, okay, if I had to like go chop wood and grow food and take care of my family in a world where there's no electricity and there's no internet, could I do it? Are we ready for that? Are we trained to do that?
I mean, it's so fascinating in the sense that, arguably for millions of years, human beings have not had access to those technologies. It's really like a 200-year experiment. I mean, even, and not to really speak to the idea of global warming, but even the idea of global warming, in my sense, if the timeline really is millions of years and we're looking at the last, several hundred to tell us if we should be worried. I mean, that is like a minuscule point on a timeline. How can you trend that out at all? So anyway, the idea of being self-sufficient is timeless. And I do think that it's awesome to live in the 21st century. It's great to be able to fly an airplane and to have air conditioning and plumbing. I mean, wouldn't want it any other way. But at the same time, to assume that it's always going to be this way, or that there won't be any fluctuations in that access, is, I think, really not true to history at all. And as you can see conflicts emerging and developing across the world, I mean, what would it take for an electromagnetic flare to just take out our electric lines and communication tools to suddenly have to be self-sufficient? Maybe not for a year, but maybe for 2 weeks. You can starve in 2 weeks. You can run out of water in 2 weeks. It's kind of a wild idea that things can be that delicate. And me being in the emergency department as a physician there taking care of people, I mean, the truth of the matter is what makes my job so raw is the fact that I'm around my community's sorrow every day, their tragedies every day. And I've said this as a theme, and I think it kind of rings through the Athos diet in indirect ways. But the miracle of Western medicine is not that we cure people from illness. The miracle is that people don't die 100 different ways every day. In other words, it's God's mercy and prevention to our sorrows that we should be like, we already owe him like 99% of the struggles and sorrows that we aren't experiencing. Like, we need to thank him for that. It's easy to be oblivious, but when you're in the ED and you see how many ways things go south every hour of the day, it makes you very grateful about the ideas of prevention. And the Athos diet actually is one of those very powerful preventative techniques for our health and to safeguard ourselves from sorrow.
Yeah, and I want to get into that. First, I do want to almost kind of fly from America and like land in Mount Athos, because
Okay.
I mean, they could, if the power went out for 2 weeks, they'd be totally fine, because they're already living that type of lifestyle. So I'm interested to see why you chose Mount Athos as the place for your sort of study and your diet, and kind of spend a little bit of time there, and then we'll bring it back to how it applies to Christians, to Americans, to
Sure.
our health.
I think there was a quote once that said, God is the light to angels, angels are the light to monastics, and monastics are the light to people. And so, I instantly feel like there's something to be gained from that monastic life and world. It is kind of odd. I believe it was Timothy Ware, Bishop, I forget now what he renamed himself, but
At
he
least
was,
it's fair. Yeah.
yes, yeah, Callisto, yeah, that's right. And essentially he said there's three different types of martyrdom. There's green, white, and red martyrdom. And green is marriage. Red is violent martyrdom, and white is monasticism. And with that said, it kind of just gets you curious, like what is there to be learned in these settings and places? And it kind of begs the questions like, what's the pinnacle of civilization? Is when you consider that when you go to a monastery, specifically the ones in Mount Athos, and they're made of stone, and everything is beautiful and meant to be built to last for eons, and that's been proven to actually be sustainable for them because it's been around so long. It draws your interest, and then you realize they're separate from all of the conveniences of civilization, yet living beyond what the average citizen that has access to all those conveniences does. And it's like, what is the secret elixir? What is the secret sauce? The lifestyle, the this or the that, that's making them last so long? Ironically, right? Because in a certain sense, they're not focused on this life, and if it ended tomorrow, they wouldn't be disappointed. Another one of their quotes is, if you die before you die, when you die, you won't die.
Mhm.
It's sort of brilliant stuff. But anyway, what drew me to them first was that it was separate from the world. It was historic and lasting. It seems like, as a UNESCO site for the world, people from all over the globe travel there just to see what's going on. And having been there myself and really feeling like it's C.S. Lewis's and J.L. Tolkien's Hobbit, and Narnia. I mean, it
Mhm.
really is a magical place, a really magical place. And you start to realize these people are outliving everyone, and yet their life is so simple. And I feel like, in a certain sense, we're kind of given the memo from society that, hey, unless you do the Western thing and practice things in a certain convenient way, you're not going to live very long. And it's sort of an enigma, sort of a paradox. But that's what brought me to them. It was beauty, it was magic, it was grace, it was mystery. And then you start to delve into why these people are living such long, filled lives, and you start to understand it's a lot is to do with lifestyle and health that is inspired from a spiritual basis. And that's the singular event. It's that spiritual beginning that then gives fruit to all these other things, that has practical and pragmatic use.
Yeah, and I think, for many people too, if they've heard of Mount Athos, I know a lot of people discovered it through, like, a 60-minute documentary from years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
It got, like, uploaded to YouTube. I would show it when I taught theology classes at a high school. I would show them the 60-minute,
Hmm.
probably, an hour-long,
Yeah.
film on Mount Athos, and it blew my kids away.
Hmm.
This the otherworldliness of it, that they grow their own food on this island, and there's not just one monastery, it's filled with
Yeah. Oh,
monasteries.
over 20.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I mean, you take walking paths from one monastery to the next. There's mountains, there's, quote unquote deserts, but also more like green forest. There's high mountains, there's valleys and plains. I mean, it's really a very special geographic area within Greece,
Mhm.
sort of on more of the northeastern side, towards Thessaloniki and like I said, people from all over the world go there, and it's not just Greek monasteries. There's Russian, Georgian, Serbian. I mean, everyone has kind of a link to that spot. And even during the world wars, I believe, even someone as terrible as Hitler actually protected that area, or at the very, maybe protected is not the right word, but he was very interested in that spot, and for certain reasons. I mean, it was. It's been around for over 1,000 years. It's a self-governing, autonomous, really, in a certain sense, I guess you could call it country. You need a visa to go there, and it still survives to this day, which is saying a lot given the wars that it's lived through and survived.
Yes, and so I wanna kind of pivot to because they're Orthodox Christians, And in Orthodoxy, monasticism is sort of like, I don't know, kind of like an icon into like what the Christian life's supposed to be.
Mhm.
Why do they fast the way that they fast? How is that similar to how like an ordinary Orthodox Christian fasts, and how is it maybe a step up as well?
Yeah, so the parameters, let's say for the regular, citizen of Orthodoxy is at 7. You on Mondays, sorry, on Wednesdays and Fridays, you don't eat meat or dairy. So you're kind of like almost like a vegan because you're not supposed to have fish those days either. And then that routine carries on throughout the year, but then you have these more long enduring fasts that are leading up to Christmas or leading up to Easter. There's a fast over the summer that's the Apostles' Fast. There's a fast for the Mother of God and her dormition or her death, et cetera, et cetera. And if you add up all those days, it actually ends up being over half the year that basically the abiding Orthodox Christian is practicing a vegan diet. And some of those you can have fish, most of them you can. But the point is that that's what sort of everyday Orthodox Christians practice. When you're a monk, they actually go a step further. They, throughout the year, follow that same timetable, but then they never eat meat. And then Mondays, they also include something called the Angels Fast, where they also are vegans that day as well. What's so wild about fasting practices is that you can get the wrong program. Fasting, it sounds like the panacea, like if you fast, you're good to go. But the reality is that when I was 7, I was doing it wrong. And that's where I think it's good to reference the monasteries, is like par excellence, how do you do it right? And that was my journey, is that by looking at the practices of monasteries throughout the world, and specifically Mount Athos, and then seeing best practices there that led to very long lives. They were mentioning that in the Byzantine age, the average citizen would live to like mid-50s. The average monk would live to their 70s, and ascetics would live to almost 100. And what is going on? And as you start to realize that these different fasting practices, none of them are all equal. When I was 7, I just thought that fasting meant I could eat all the white bread and candy I wanted. No meat, no dairy, I'm good to go. And I was a pretty husky kid. I mean, but it finally got me into my 20s to realize, gosh, I got to get some return on investment from a health perspective, which I think was my error, because a lot of times we discuss these things as like, oh, it's the art, it's the discipline, it's the act of virtue. There really isn't supposed to be a health benefit. In fact, isn't the body prone to lust and prone to vanity, and what are we doing with that? But the reality is being unhealthy is a vice. Being gluttonous is a vice. Not being able to restrain yourself is a vice. And our bodies, as a reflection of our souls, as a manifestation, I think, of our souls, it does speak to a number of things through our physiology that sometimes our mind and souls are trying to speak to, manifest through. And so what I noticed was that some of these monasteries, and certainly the ascetics, they would fast until the 9th hour. In fact, they would eat nothing until the 9th hour. And the reason for that is Christ himself, as he was being crucified, was essentially did not eat anything until the 9th hour. So they fast and struggle with him. Christ didn't eat till the 9th hour. I'm not going to eat till the 9th hour. And then they have communion. Then they have a meal. And then that's it. And what you start to realize is they're sort of living this very regimented ritual. They're actually practicing intermittent fasting. Now, they would never call it that, but the spiritual beginning of that, based on something very meaningful and theological, was struggling with Christ at the 9th hour. And now suddenly, these monks are entering in this field of intermittent fasting. And when you do that, you live 30% longer across every species that does it. That's a mammal. You take monkeys, you take chimpanzees, cows, dogs, rats, and their lifespan expands by 30%. Never mind the food that they eat, which is another thing to consider. But just eating all of that food within a certain window of the day, that a continuous window, so 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, etc. Suddenly now you are turning on your physiology in a way that you heal, that you recover, and that there's a myriad of health benefits. But essentially, the end act of all of that is living a long, long time. And that's what the
Mm.
ascetics did. And that's the most powerful pillar of the Athos diet. It's intermittent fasting, and it's all inspired from this monastic tradition. That's where it began.
Yeah, I heard that when you give your body a break like that, almost kind of like anti-aging systems kick in your body.
Yes, there was a gentleman who was just given a Nobel Prize, just like 6 or 7 years ago, who basically mapped out autophagy. And autophagy is a cell's ability to heal itself under times of stress. I mean, imagine you're trying to renovate your house, and instead of just going out and getting new material, you kind of repurpose old stuff. Instead of heating your house with the furniture, you heat your house with other fuels that are more that won't like take such a burden, make such a burden on your body. Maybe not the best analogy, but the point is that autophagy is your body's ability to heal itself, and to make good use of old things so that it doesn't constantly sort of run through cycles of inefficiency. And essentially, when you fast, autophagy goes up, growth hormones release, which is a youth invigorating hormone. You secrete ketones. Your lipid profile improves. I mean, there's so many things, and I go into detail in the book as to what gets turned on with this lifestyle. But you can see how, from a spiritual center and from a lifestyle that comes from that, and then all the physiology follows, how that is good for you and good for society. And it's probably like the world's greatest health hack for improving longevity, and frankly speaking, eliminating what seems to be 80% of disease. Like 80% of disease is considered completely preventable. There's so many sorrows that we as a modern age suffer through that are completely preventable, and we need to be accountable for that. We need to own that. And it's not all God hating us. It's not all the volcano blowing up. Like 80% of the volcanoes can be prevented. Like we need to own that, and we need to get on that as soon as possible, because when you lose a family member, or you yourself are losing function, you can see how that can break down a person, a family, a community, a nation. And we're seeing the results of all of that. But intermittent fasting, specifically done in the right way, is a true game changer for you and everyone.
I think this is why I get really captivated by this type of conversation. And that's because I do see people who want to follow the Lord and they want to have a deep spirituality, but they're not able to connect all spheres of their life with it. And so they get easily distracted, or they go down these they make these turns in their life, and then God is out of the picture because they haven't connected their health, their marriage, their work, everything about their life with God. And what I love about your book is it's teaching us about how God's designed our bodies so that we can have energy, so that we can have health to serve him. I mean, think about a dad. Like, a dad who has no energy isn't going to be that good of a dad. He can't play with his kids. He can't go hiking with his kids. He can't do his job and then come home and still have what he needs to be a dad. So even just that aspect.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could play that out in a million different ways. And, I don't know if you've ever seen anyone have a stroke, but it is the number one disease for long-term disability in the United States. I mean, the idea of not being able to speak again, or not be able to walk again, not to be able to play ball with your kid again, your grandkid. I mean, we live long lives. I mean, we spend most of our lives really anymore as almost like senior citizens. I mean, we value youth a lot in the United States and in Western society, but the reality is we're kind of middle-aged and older for a very long time. And I would say the magic age in my mind, given risk factors, when we ask people about, what age they are and risk factors for heart disease and stroke, is like 55 seems to be a number that we quote a lot. Hey, are you 55 yet? And if you've hit that threshold, it's like you better have some lifestyle and skill sets in your toolbox to help you live a long, functional life. And you can see the results of things when you don't have that access to function, and it manifests as a loss of productivity. You can't keep your job. What's a man without a job? You can't play with your kids. What's a dad that can't play with his children? What's a grandparent that can't take their kids out for ice cream or drive? I mean, there's so many practical things. It's, as they say, we have to have feet on the earth and your head in the heavens, and it's, you got to be in both places. And if you're just kind of floating in the clouds, you're not really helping much. And on a pragmatic level, it's faith and works, and so I think in general, it's very important that we protect the temple of our soul, and that we understand. I'll give you an example. Like, the pathways for addiction through the brain are the same as for eating and consumption. I mean, the idea that the highway that allows you to show restraint in the let's call it the territory of addiction. If you don't want to be addicted to heroin, to alcohol, to benzos, to all sorts of different drugs, meth, cocaine, etc., fast. I mean, that is the way to pave a highway that has basically speed bumps. And it's interesting to me that God, in a certain sense, as devastating as addiction can be, where we're losing more people now to heroin overdoses than car accidents, and we all know the terrible effects of addiction on a person's life through substance abuse. But the idea that as a 7-year-old, the church in its wisdom has said, you know what? We know what's coming, and we know what you're prone to. And we have this technique based on food and restraint that you're going to practice every day throughout the year. And you know what? All the sorrows of addiction and overdose and watching a loved one die, will be gone. Will be gone. I mean, it all starts with food. And so what a humble first step to protect us from a tornado and tidal wave of suffering. I think that's, as you mentioned, that is the alignment between body and soul, between daily life routine, and fighting a war that never needs to be started, because we don't even need to declare it. It's so well prevented and safeguarded from.
No doubt. I mean, the Lord doesn't want to just be Lord of our spirits, but also Lord of our bodies and what we do with our bodies. And so I think where we as Americans oftentimes get off track is we think, oh, as long as we're avoiding evil, we can live like kings, and as long as it's good, as long as it's I have a right to eat meat, I have a right to do this and this. But then quickly we see our lives getting out of control. We're addicted to screens. We're addicted to sex. We're eventually addicted to drugs, all these things.
Right.
Every epidemic that we see in our society, those unhealthy tendencies, a lot of times it comes from that idea that we're allowed to feast upon this. But then we enter into that evil, we cross a line, and then we realize, well, what happened? How did I get there? St. Basil the Great has a great line about the garden, and that because Adam and Eve didn't fast, we lost paradise. He says this: because we did not fast, we were chased out of paradise. Let us fast now, so that someday we can return there. And I love that quote.
It's beautiful. And I'll say this, it's interesting to me that as much as we in West value our brains as this highest pinnacle of our anatomy, the reality is there's another nervous system that's even bigger than the brain. And that's called the enteric nervous system. It lines our gut and our intestine. It's bigger. There's more neurons. There's more interconnections. And I find it interesting that, in a certain sense, I think in Christianity, kind of one of the highest sacraments or mysteries is communion. I mean, it is a food. It is a food. We consume it. It's not a spell. It's not an intellectual, event. There's many things that go into the beauty of a liturgy and communion, certainly, but ultimately it's a passage of food that you digest, that hits your enteric nervous system, that communes with that. And just like we say, in our society, our culture, hey, go with your gut. Does that speak to the idea that our enteric nervous system has more power than the brain? I mean, we think of all the things the brain can do, all of our senses, but here is this second engine that is I think to some extent completely underappreciated, especially in Western society. And how do we communicate with the enteric nervous system? Through food. And what was the first edict or commandment from Christ or from God was not to eat a certain food. I mean, it really is kind of an interesting question of like, what is our true center? And if we can press the right buttons for our spiritual life, it should manifest in other ways. And I think the mechanism, that link between soul and body, in a certain powerful sense, the best return on investment is probably through something like fasting.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, I think someone like Bishop Barron, he said that when the soul is sick, it only takes a little bit amount of time before the mind becomes sick. And then when the mind becomes sick, the body gets sick. And there's like this interface. Well, it can go the other way too. When the body's sick, the mind becomes cloudy and groggy, loss of energy, and that affects our souls, and so there you cannot disconnect the mind, the body, the nous, and the soul. They're all interconnected in our Christian worldview.
I'll give you a dramatic example of that. Maybe once a year I diagnose this in a patient, but they come in with severe weight loss, epigastric pain where their upper belly hurts, and they're terribly depressed. What's going on? Pancreatic cancer every time. It's incredible. It's like there's something going on in that person's body that is a true pathology. I mean, it's a big deal. And one way or another, they don't even know that they have it yet. And they're severely depressed. And it's such a strong correlation that's the syndrome. You look for it. Epigastric pain, severe weight loss, and severe depression. Those people have pancreatic cancer, and 6 months later, they're gone. So, it's absolutely undeniable that there is an interlink between mind, soul, and body. And I like to say that we reach the soul through the senses. There's something to that. And I remember there was a debate I watched once. A Christian was probed by an atheist, hey, what's one thing that gives you doubt that God does not exist? It's a pretty strong question. And he said, when I saw my mother deteriorate in her old age through Alzheimer's, and she just wasn't herself anymore, I was just like, what is going on? Like this, in my mind, independent of her body, her mind and spirit should be intact, but the reality is that's not the case. I mean, we have a resurrected body. Like, why does God even go through that? Why aren't we all just ghosts and phantoms in the new world? Why does he take such effort to resurrect our bodies? There must be something valuable about it, and something mechanically necessary for us to keep that link, that old hardware around. And so, we should not minimize the connection between those aspects of ourselves. I think it's an ancient concept too. It's nothing new, really.
Right, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about my bread and butter when it comes to theology, and that is the resurrection of the body, the resurrection of creation itself. Romans chapter 8, it'll be liberated at our resurrection at the end of the world. This doesn't get talked enough about, and that can affect our life right now. If we think our faith is just this cloudy spirituality that doesn't have to do with my body or the land, or even the political sphere, all these things, then we're not really fully grasping how Christ wants to be Lord of all. I think there's something that we're missing there, and so I want to turn the conversation just a touch, and I want to focus on, okay, why fast from meat? Why do something like what the monks do, which it seems, I mean, to an American, like crazy, like to fast like that, from abstaining from that kind of food. Why not take shortcuts like a diet pill, or why not like something like the Atkins diet, which is very popular in American society, like just eat meat all the time and just cut out carbs? Why not just do that? Why the Mount Athos diet?
Yeah, so these are good questions, and I think last time I checked, America spends like $52 billion a year on weight loss, industry, drugs, exercise, etc., supplements. which is larger than the GDP of the country of Hungary, which I thought was always kind of a funny reference point. But point is that Americans spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to lose the weight that they're putting on day after day. And I think the diagnosis for that really is because we've created a world that's 24/7, global, very convenient. And I mean, food is fundamental. It is fundamental, and people just want more of something that feels good. And so there's some great opportunity in that. But at the same time, if you don't show restraint, you can really get crushed by your own excess. And in fact, I would say in some descriptions, civilization by definition is restraint amidst convenience and excess. Like that's what true civilization is. It's not just technology, it's not just plenty, it's like the ability to recognize we're there now, and this is how we conduct ourselves in plenty. In a certain sense, as you ascend the hierarchy of class, imagine like your prince and princess and prince and king and queen, where they don't eat everything on their plate. It's proper not to finish everything, to show restraint, to not house down the whole cup of tea, but drink it slowly. Like it's kind of an interesting idea. You're trying to pretend as you rise the ranks that you're so used to this that you don't even need to consume it all the time. I don't need to finish everything on my plate. And I think civilization to some extent needs to be more aware of that. Is the goal isn't just to be able to eat 24/7. It's to be able to eat at any time, maybe, but you have to show restraint. So anyway, when it comes to meat and whatnot, I mean, I'll be the first one to say I absolutely love meat. I'm a carnivore for sure, but it depends on the time of year. I like to say this. I mean, some people don't. A lot of people will probably eat more meat than I do throughout the year when you add it all up, but I definitely taste it more when I consume it. And all of life is that way. I mean, whether it be a runner in a race, someone training for the Olympics, there's ebbs and flows of restraint and sort of feast and famine. And the reality is actually, is it that great to be an Olympian? Like all of that effort for just like 10 minutes on the podium to get your medal, but it is worth it. It is worth it. And so I'll say the same thing about our daily lives. Like we need to have a lot of restraint and limitations throughout our day, and then some periods of feasting. And so when it comes to the amount of food, I think that needs to be sort of considered in a measured way. And then what food we eat, I think needs to be considered in a measured way. I mean, one of the highest reasons we have such extreme rates of rectal cancer and prostate cancers because of all the red meat we eat. Nothing bad with red meat, but eating it like all day long every year for your whole life is probably a recipe for something to go wrong. And as an omnivore participating in the human species, we need to be able to digest and eat many different types of foods. You could be Jordan Peterson and only eat steak. And, again, he's probably benefiting because he's prone to autoimmune disease. And there's probably a lot of stuff in food that's processed and that's mixed that, that you can't track. And so you're getting this autoimmune response that you'd like to not have. You stick to steak, and there's no gluten in that. There's no processed sugar in that. There's no et cetera in that. And so it really is an elimination diet. I'm sure he'd feel just as good if I got him on like pea protein and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you're consuming a valid, safe source of something. So anyway, but with that said, though, with that said, though, I would recommend people have a balanced diet with variety, and it should just like the seasons. There are 4 seasons throughout the year. It should oscillate throughout the year. We should have parts of the year where we're eating certain things and parts of the year where we're not. And just like the sun is hotter in the summer and colder in the winter. I mean, just all of our evolution, all of our physiology is based on this oscillation and this ups and downs and changes. And if we're a product of our environment, although blessed path to do so, I think we need to live that way too. And in the book, I make the comparison to a polar bear in the desert. Like that's what human beings are. We are these extraordinary creatures in the wrong environment. Take a polar bear, you put them in the North Pole, and they're swimming 80 miles at a time, taking on orca whales, eating seals that are like 3,000 pounds, masters of their kingdom. And that's amazing. But then you take that same thing and put it in the desert, and it is the most useless waste of space. And I feel like that's what we are as human beings in the civilized world. We are meant for this aspect and environment of changing seasons, ebbs and flows of plenty and poverty. And in the 21st century, all we get to be is 72 degrees all year long through air conditioning. We're sitting all day. We're just this nice, even, and there's just not enough variability. And I think we all feel that. And I always joke around. It's no wonder that so many people are so depressed. I mean, once a year when I go and slaughter a sheep and rotisserie it, it's like the best day of my life that day, which of course is Pascha, it's Easter, no coincidence. But, to think that in the old days, they used to just do that like every 3 days. I mean, I'm getting this giant euphoria from just doing it once a year, and in the old times, they just did it all the time, and so with that said, so much of how we live in the 21st century is that benefit of civilization that then we start to live for versus it just supporting us.
Yeah, I think of it like this, like a house plant that's got the perfect conditions inside, and then you take it outside and it experiences real sunshine, real wind, and it's just gonna snap. I'm a big gardener. Well, I used to, and I don't do it so much anymore, but in my younger days, when I had less kids, I would grow a lot of things inside and then transition them outside so I could get kind of a head start, and from those cold months to the spring. And you have to be very careful about that, because if you've been, just giving them a pristine environment for a month, and then you throw them outside, I mean, you can kill it real fast if you don't transition them well.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think our bodies and our spirits, are very similar to that. If our spirit is always comfortable, it's gonna lead to addiction. It's gonna lead to sin. If we're always in the mindset that we're kings and we're made to made to feast constantly, that means Jesus isn't really king. It means we're king psychologically.
Yeah.
And so I think what I've learned about fasting, what fasting has taught me, because I adopted the Christian East fasting lifestyle about 4 years ago as a Catholic. And it's something that, of course, oh my goodness, it was really hard at first. And of course it's still hard in a sense, but once, probably after I did it for a year and I learned that whole rhythm, got kind of like a whole year under my belt, it kind of blew me away. Where like I was much more aware of my desires. It was almost like I knew if I wanted something, I could now have a better sense of controlling that, whether that be a good or evil thing. So fasting does teach you to control, and it teaches you to be uncomfortable, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, if imagine in the wisdom of the church, you're starting this at 7, and by the time you're going through the crazy changes of hormones as a teenager, you've already laid out this pathway cerebrally to keep discipline, to understand what delayed gratification is, to understand that you're fasting for 49 days so that you can eat that lamb, and it's going to be the most delicious lamb you've ever had in your life. I mean, that sounds kind of like marriage too, right? I mean, it's like we could make so many comparisons as to what that means, what delayed gratification means, and how preparing for quality over quantity is a good way to live.
No doubt. I think fasting really teaches you a lot about what a healthy marriage looks like. Because if you go into if you're a young person, you go into marriage and you're like, I'm going to feast all the time. I'm not going to go. It's like, that's not. First of all, that's not reality. And then secondly, yeah, you're going to be disappointed, and you're going to be confused about what this whole thing's about. It's about self-giving. It's not about feasting and taking. The best marriages are those who you're thinking of the other person, and you're thinking about, most of all, what does God want for this family? That's a missional marriage, a missional family. And I think fasting goes right into that. And I think it's because you take that word asceticism, and it means training. Well, if you're being trained, what are you being trained for? You have to have a purpose. You have to have a mission. And so Christian fasting is always connected to prayer and the mission that God has for us.
Well, and again, it's almost like Do we have to ask God to rain down brimstone so that we're forced to fast and learn that discipline? Or can we live in the 21st century with plumbing and convenience and globalization and then create some measures that keep us still raw, hungry, and sober? You know what I mean? And in that way, it's like best of all worlds. Let's get rid of tragedy and let's replace it with good old fashioned challenge. And in
No doubt.
fact, I always remember that as a child. It was my weird prayer I had with God was that I asked him to eliminate tragedies from my life, but fill my life with challenges. And I felt I had an innate sense that you could exchange those somehow. It's like if you don't take on the challenges, tragedy will eventually come. But if you pick up those challenges, you can just fill your life with healthy challenges. And it's your day's exhausting. You go to sleep tired, but you're not devastated. And I feel like to some extent, fasting and like I'll say, the Athos diet is really just orthodox fasting par excellence. But that fasting practice is a wonderful way of creating those challenges and I guess avoiding 80% of all preventable diseases. Like just throwing it out there. And then, you can be there for your kids and your grandkids and maybe even your great grandkids and be that person that's lived forever, in spirit. And that's a powerful thought. I mean, it's so beyond vanity. It really is. It's not about the six pack at the beach. By all means, I'm sure that's a proxy for good health. But the reality is that we've taken a topic of health and we've removed it from the realm of medicine. And well, we've taken this topic of diet and we removed it from this industry or this issue of health and longevity and function. And so we can make it a consuming like item or that we can sell. And instead, we need to remind ourselves, guys, this is not about vanity. This is about being there for your kids, having high functional status, being able to lead a full, healthy life, and outlasting, many of the things that take people out every day.
Yeah, right on, brother. I go back to Saint Basil because um, he said that we fast to train in order that we can fight the kingdom of darkness, which of course it's not flesh and blood, but that's sort of the element that I think sometimes we miss in our faith. We think it's just, oh, I'm connecting with God. I have a family. We go to church. That's about it. But when you study scripture and you study our tradition, it's like, no, we live in a world of demons. We live in there's an unseen world that needs to be conquered. And Jesus, when you read the Gospels, is doing this constantly. He sends out his disciples. He sends them out to cast out demons, heal people. He sends them out to proclaim the goodness, the message, the gospel of the Lord, to baptize. And he says that certain demons will not come out without prayer and fasting. So I think that's kind of the wild, there's the secular side that we could talk about with dieting and eating, but then there's as Orthodox, as Catholic Christians, there and any Christian, there's kind of a sober mindedness that we need to develop that fasting helps us get there.
Well, and again, just to bring this back to medicine, I mean, that same passage that you're referring to, this demon will not come out without prayer and fasting. And he's speaking about this epileptic. That was taken very seriously by a doctor about 100 years ago who took about 20 to 30 kids with intractable seizures and put them on a fasting diet. So in this case, the fasting is defined as he didn't give them anything to eat. It was vitamins and water for weeks. And all the seizures went away. And he was completely basing it on this scriptural passage. Now, what's so wild is that the efficacy of fasting and treating some forms of epilepsy is just as good as the medication, actually, without the side effects. If you've seen kids that are on anti-epileptics, I mean, sometimes they look like zombies. They're just really sedated. Really, that's what a seizure is. The brain goes into hyperactivity and starts sending out flares and signals to different parts of the body that shouldn't be activated. And so you have to sedate that in a way. Fasting, as is described by limiting what you eat and when you eat, is completely medication without side effects of those forms. And as they got more and more intelligent or sophisticated about what was going on, they realized that when you fast, you start breaking down fat for energy instead of sugar. And when you break down fat, it gives off ketones in your bloodstream. Ketones go to the brain, and those are actually very, for lack of a better word, soothing and helpful and efficacious for brain activity. And that's what prevents you from having the seizures that many people with epilepsy experience.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful sort of testimonial there.
Yeah, I mean, it's biblical, it's useful, it's all of that. My mind, that's how we need to align the scripture and our lifestyles, in those ways. And then imagine you don't have epilepsy and you just do that anyway. What that must mean for your brain. And I can tell you, I work 13-hour shifts. Oftentimes they're overnight shifts. I might have almost 30 patients on my list that I'm taking care of that are septic and have heart attacks and strokes and children who are screaming. And it's like a battleground. I mean, honestly, but I haven't eaten. Like I'm not eating. I'm not getting hangry. I'm eating ketones. That's my fuel. That's my fuel for my shift. And it's actually very helpful. It's helpful to my patients. I feel like I have a certain mental clarity and a volume of people I can see that a lot of docs don't, because they're taking breaks to eat. They're getting upset as their energy levels go up and down and fluctuate. And interesting how maybe changing a lifestyle can give you a fuel and keep your brain and your emotions calm in a stressful moment that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Another manifestation.
Yeah, I think some of the fathers, desert fathers, may even reference it as kind of the brightness of the mind. Like a clarity that almost kind of opens up. Of course, when I start fasting, I get really groggy and cloudy at first, but it takes particularly if it's like the great fast, like Lent.
You know what? So let me just say this for a second, the Athos diet, because I really don't want anyone to forget what we're really talking about, which is how to fast properly. So let's just imagine, okay, someone just says, hey, go out and fast. You're like, oh, does that mean I don't eat? Does that mean I don't eat certain foods? Does that mean I don't eat certain times of the day? And all of that can be true, and combinations of that. But when I looked at pockets of fasting practices in different communities around the world, and specifically at Mount Athos, and I isolated the best practices to get the best outcome, the parameters for a good fast with good return on investment for your physiology, your mood, your life, your function, et cetera, was essentially this: do not eat food for more than 8 hours a day. Do not eat food for more than 8 hours a day. And that has to be continuous. So let's give an example. You start eating your first calorie at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. You should not consume anything after 8 p.m. that day. That's 8 hours. You could shift that wherever you want, but that's just an example. The second part is to limit the amount of carbohydrate and really increase the protein. But in my recommendation is to get that protein from plant sources. So pea protein, nuts, soy, different things like that. And you can achieve quite a bit of protein with very little carbohydrate exposure, even though it's coming from plant. It's interesting. And then finally, it's just simple walking. You don't have to do CrossFit. You don't have to be a power lifter. And if you do those three things every day, you will likely live 30% longer than the person next to you. You will likely have function beyond what most people experience at that age around you. And you will probably, like I said, going back to this theme of preventing 80% of disease that most people are experiencing by your age, for your cohort or your generation. It's that powerful. And I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I ate all day long at random. When I was a kid, I ate all the white bread and all the candy that didn't have meat or dairy in it as I could get my hands on. I was starving all the time. And then for exercise, I was going through these ebbs and flows of trying to run 10 miles, then nothing, and then being depressed. And, it was crazy. So what I would say for the 200 plus million people around the world that are Orthodox Christians who should be doing this is the way to do it the right way. And for all those people that are just looking for a biohack that is coded in spirituality, really, this is also the way to do it as well.
Oh, and I'll add this too, because there's 1.2 billion Catholic Christians. The Orthodox fasting regimen is exactly the same as what Catholics used to have.
Yes,
for most of their history. I've done in-depth research on this. In the 9th century, Pope Nicholas the First will talk about literally the exact same fasting schedule, like the 4 big fasts throughout the year, leading up to Christmas, the Nativity fast, leading up to Easter, the Great Fast, Lent. You've got the Apostles' fast in the summer, and then you have the fast leading up to the Assumption of Mary. That's what he mentions in the 9th century, documenting. And he
Yeah.
says, and
Yeah.
we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays from meat. Friday's the bigger deal. They're both important, but Friday's the bigger one.
Mhm.
And he just outlines the exact same schedule. When you get to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, describes the exact same things. And he even says, we don't do meat in any of the fasts. We allow egg and dairy on some of the smaller fasts, but never during Lent. So you can find it all over the place, the exact same thing. And really the last couple of centuries, that just got more and more laxed. The idea wasn't that the Catholic Church wanted to eliminate that whole thing. They just became they took the exception, like, oh, these people are in particularly with the Industrial Revolution, people were in a factory and they left the farm, the land, and they were in a factory for 15 hours or something. And that's where the exceptions began kicking in. Well, then the exception became the rule and everybody's forgotten it. So
Yeah, I think it was Bishop Barron that basically was talking to Jordan Peterson and just saying, hey, people want to resurrect those challenges that we dispensed with. Like that idea of lowering the threshold or the competition threshold, it's not attracting men. It's not attracting young people. People want to feel like they're on an adventure of their lives through duty and challenges and so we need to bring back a lot of that stuff. And again, it's been a growing pain, right? I mean, all of human civilization has kind of been sort of minimizing all that it has achieved prior to the Industrial Revolution and sort of saying, hey, that was the old world. We need to get the new ways. We were in the dark ages and we didn't understand X, Y, and Z. And so now it's time to truly find ourselves. But the reality is, as we move forward into this scientific age, is that we're kind of going back to realizing that a lot of this stuff has a great deal of wisdom to it and benefit to it. And maybe one is discovered through hypothesis and scientific experiment and rigor. The other one is found through oral tradition and determining and trusting your forefathers that what they did was okay, and maybe optimizing something. And what finally emerges is a lifestyle and ritual that's quite healthy and quite good.
Right.
And so I'll just say, coming back to a doctor's example, I mean, again, sexually transmitted diseases. I mean, it's a big deal prior to antibiotics. Huge deal. I mean, the idea that a woman could be exposed to certain bacteria that could make their child blind upon birth, give chronic arthritis to her husband or spouse, and for her probably to become infertile through different infections and abscesses, etc. I mean, all of that was just a real thing, up until we had antibiotics to take care of it. Thank God, we have a way to kind of reset the clock and move forward and not allow that little baby to go blind from it. But that's what it meant to be, to not be monogamous, to not be faithful, to not be loyal. That's how those vices manifested themselves. And I don't know if you've been watching The Witcher. It's probably too risque, but point is that I think the entire book or saga is based on a Polish author, I believe, who essentially recognizes that every time someone sins, a monster is created, and then the Witcher comes in and destroys it. And so it just, I just feel like in some ways that's kind of the narrative of the 21st century is, and why we created the traditions that we did. We recognize that certain monsters emerge from our vices, and then we create tradition and ritual to safeguard ourselves from that. And not to say it's just all pragmatic. I think that's too reductionist anyway. But it is to say that, we shouldn't just dispense of everything that we used to believe. And
I think that's probably one of the biggest objections by modern man is that, like, the church's wisdom in feasting and fasting, in liturgy, and the calendar is like, that it was arbitrary or something. I think that's one of the biggest objections. Like, they don't see the wisdom, they don't see how it's going to change them. Oh, that's just arbitrary that they would do it that way. And in reality, it's just the opposite that we're finding in
Mhm.
medical science, but also I think in spirituality, we're finding it's the opposite. No, this had true wisdom.
And then, imagine if the pursuit of all pharmaceuticals is to make money, and not to say that, again, that would be reducing things too, but imagine that intermittent fasting, which is a zero cost strategy, could just instantly lead to 30% longer longevity. I mean, what an idea. What an idea that God's mercy to us is something so simple yet so profound. And so, yeah, I wrote this book, The Athos Diet, to sort of celebrate the heritage and the tradition of the Orthodox faith, to help those who are Christians throughout the world fast in a medically uh, oriented way that gives you health benefit, and so that you're achieving as many pluses from as much scientific punch as possible from this spiritual exercise. And it's been quite a road. We've sold books globally. People from all over the world are very interested to know how they can get this health benefit, and also then sort of wait. Some of them pursue it from a spiritual standpoint and end up at the health benefit. Some of it just want the health benefit and realize, oh, there's a spiritual benefit. And so,
Mhm.
whichever way you come in the door, I think is a benefit. And so, yeah, it's been really really gratifying. But it's a celebration of heritage, of tradition, of our theological grounding, and trying to make sure that we eliminate as much sorrow that we don't need to experience as possible. And sometimes I guess that comes one spoonful at a time,
Mm.
during limited hours of the day.
Well, I want everybody who's watching this interview to get on and check out, purchase the Athos diet. Before there was Atkins, there was Athos by Dr. Pete. I think you're going to get a lot of wisdom out of it. For those that watch my channel, I am developing a course on fasting. I'm not going to have everything that Dr. Pete's got, like all the medical side. I'm just going to be going in depth with really kind of like the theological and the spirituality of what I call the ancient Christian fasting program, like the program that makes saints. Like, you want to
Mhm.
be a saint? Well, all the saints fasted and they followed this ancient program.
Mhm.
Um, Almost all of them. So for me, it's also a program that produces holiness and saints and those people that we want to be around. You know, the saints were not people who we don't want to be around because they're boring. No, they're fully alive. You know, so my course is going to be called To Love Fasting. So I'll be jumping in through the biblical foundations for fasting, also throughout church history. I think even my Protestant listeners who might think, oh, this is something that the church came up with like a whole lot later, are going to be really surprised to see like the Didache, which was written in the late first century, recommends fasting. That, first of all, it doesn't just recommend it; it actually calls on
Mhm.
all Christians to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. Uh, and this was a discipline kept throughout the whole Christian world. You could go all the way to India, to Spain, east, west, wherever you went, everyone fasted on Wednesdays and Fridays. It was a universal custom. And St. John Chrysostom says this came from the apostles themselves. So it's interesting stuff. So I've got that course that'll be coming down the road. Um, but thanks, Dr. Pete, for coming on. I wanted to ask you a couple more questions. Like, what are some good recipes? Like, what are a couple meals that maybe like your family eats when you're abstaining from meat and
Yeah, in the back of the book, actually, we walk people through this 48-day fast, and in fact, there are recipes for every day of the fast. So it's a 48-day, I should say. So the Athos diet itself has a start and a finish. It goes over 48 days, and in the back there's a calendar, and you can sort of follow our recipes. But things that I like to ensure that I get enough protein, I do like a pea protein shake every day. It's like fruits and pea protein. You can get a lot through there. Essentially, you can have shrimp and scallops. That is very high in protein and fat, and is very helpful throughout the fast. But certainly, all your peanut butters, your peas, your tofu. There's some. I mean, it's a great time to be a fasting person. I mean, the reality is that they have spaghetti noodles now that are so high in protein, that taste great. That even you can find bodybuilders that pride themselves as being vegans, who again, not that they're the people to mimic, but I'm just saying is that they've figured out a way to keep their protein intake high, and to do it in a way that's consistent with their sort of vegan parameters, which are very similar to ours. So, I would say that it's amazing actually how much latitude there is and variety there is online. But we certainly have recipes in the book, and it's one of the reasons why you should buy the hard copy, because you kind of can open that and page through it at your leisure each day to sort of eat the next yummy thing.
Ooh, there you go. So I love how you brought out the 48 days, the recipes, and this is not just like a theoretical book on the medical
Right.
side, but also it's very practical as for applying to your life. We've started eating over the last couple of years a lot of roasted chickpeas.
Mhm.
I'll put it in the air fryer, and I'll also have chickpeas on hand because I make a lot of hummus. But roasted chickpeas, throw some garlic, some different seasonings that you like, whether they're spicy or bland, whatever you like. Throw it in there, and they get real crispy. And you can just eat them when they come out. I do about 415 degrees for about 15 minutes
Hmm.
with some olive oil. And they come out, and you can eat them either like chips, just crispy. You can make them
Yeah.
crispier if you want, or I'll throw them into a dish, which brings it almost feels like you're eating meat in that dish.
I can hear the crunch in my ears as you're chomping on
There you
those.
go. You can throw it in
It
with some rice, or you can throw some
Yeah, yeah.
mushrooms, lentils. I mean, it's fun. What I've discovered is that some of the best food recipes in the world were created during times of fasting in cultures.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
things that we think are like, "Oh, that's such a cool dish." Well, that dish was created
Hmm.
during a time where that culture was in their fast, and so they didn't eat those things, and they ate these things.
Yeah, no, well said. And I mean, it's amazing how intentional you have to be about seasoning and spices and how many things you'll add to it, which of course, all these herbs and spices have medicinal properties too. But you will add more of that and your food will taste more flavorful. And you can't just, eat the burger with a little bit of ketchup. You got to season that thing. And this item now that you're cooking during the fast. And so you become a better cook. I mean, it brings flavor to your life. It really is a universe of that causes you to use more food items and culinary tricks to make food taste good. It's a good tool set.
It is. I think the United States, America will even if it really adopts fasting like other cultures have, I think if we adopt it at a serious level, we might even enter into kind of like a culinary renaissance where we learn how to cook in different ways, and it benefits our health and our celebrations. And I this isn't people don't have to be afraid of this, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why people stay away from this type of fasting and eating is because they're just scared. It's so different than what they're used to.
Well, what I tell people is after the 48-day fast, like, oh, what should I do now? And like I said, during the 48 days, you're basically a vegan and eating a certain amount of time a day and avoiding carbs, trying to get as much protein as possible. But after that, kind of a maintenance diet is basically to still do the same thing, but include your protein source now from meat sources.
Mhm.
And so that's what I do is I basically, if it's a fasting day by our religious calendar, I do it Athos diet style. And then outside of that, I'm essentially doing the same intermittent fasting windows. Like today, for instance, I haven't eaten yet. And then I'll eat, just good healthy proteins from meat or chicken or beef, etc. And that's great. I mean, that's a nice way to change it up and to keep things kind of current and exciting and different. But I just go in and out of it, and it's always the same parameters though. And I think it really is a recipe for a very healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, it's really, for those listeners who are like have like a liturgical mind, like we call it the octave, like those 8 days of celebration when a big feast ends. Like,
Hmm.
so you've got like the octave of like Pascha, Easter, and
Yeah.
no, or Bright Week, called Bright Week. And that's a time where you're like allowed, you don't even have to fast on Wednesday or Friday of meat.
Right. Right.
You just like pig out. And I eat, because I haven't eaten meat for all of Lent for Great Fast. I eat so much meat that week that it's like
Right.
this feels like a king's feast. Like, I am so happy of I love the resurrection. It's awesome.
Yes. And it's a wonderful thing to correlate and to synchronize that feeling of energy and the spirituality of the resurrection. All it's like just like a piece of paper with ink, is The Hobbit. Like, where did that come from? Where did that synergy come from? Well, it's like the same thing. You correlate the feasting with the prayer, and suddenly a third something comes from it, and that's celebration. That's what celebration is, and it's a wonderful thing. Like, don't rob yourself of that experience. Don't. We need to put the ink on the paper to get the books and the narratives and the sagas and the stories and adventures. We need to correlate the eating, feasting with the ceremony in order to celebrate to the fullest. And it's a wonderful way to live. It's a wonderful way to live.
I like how you brought in a little bit of hobbits and Middle Earth and stuff like that, because I think in those terms all the time. I'm in my little fantasy world, I guess, but for me, it actually is reality. I mean, when you look at scripture, you see when they're fasting, it's kind of like not eating, or it's like bread and water, some vegetables. And then when they're feasting, it's like slaughter the fattened calf,
Right.
raise the glass of red wine. It's time to celebrate. And what they ate really did that. Now, part of it's financial. Like, they didn't have money to slaughter a calf every day, That's not living off the land. It's not those rhythms that our ancient people went through. But you see that there. You also see, fasting as like a type of spirituality that's preparing you to do something great. It's 40 days is a biblical symbol for preparation, entering into something, preparing for something. But anyways, back to hobbits. I think of Frodo and Sam fasting in Mordor. They're only eating one thing, which is lembas bread, like this elvish bread, and it's a symbol of the Eucharist. Tolkien put that in there. And so they're only feasting on communion. It's kind of like their great fast, their Lent, but they're conquering, the dragon, the kingdom of darkness. And when they defeat him, they go back and you see them at the Green Dragon, which is the place of festivity. Their pub, dancing on tables, having an ale, eating good food, back at the Shire. That's the rhythm that we need to be in. We need to conquer Mordor, but then we need to go back home. And that's the rhythm that I see when you adopt this lifestyle.
That's right. Conquer Mordor and turn on the autophagy and release the growth hormone and, improve your lipid profile. I mean, all of that just comes, it's amazing. It really is amazing. And all of those things are described in the book mechanically, but let it not rob you of the true splendor of the lifestyle. And that's where we live, right? We don't live in organelles in the cells. We don't care about lipolysis. We don't care about ketones. What we care about is, are we feeling well? Are we there for our families? Are we functional? Are we living long lives? Is there a wisdom to all that's being discussed? What are we benefiting from in terms of perspective and strategy? Like, that's where the human mind really participates. It's good to know that we can go high resolution and under a microscope, but at the same time, I think that's where the spiritual life is so powerful. It's like, how do we communicate all of these themes into something digestible? And it's through our church, it's through our spirituality, it's through our rubrics and our theology. And just like Jordan Peterson talks about these sort of, these meta narratives. I mean, that's, basically might as well just say scripture. But all of this is kind of conscious and subconscious. And some of us have gifts to open those things up to the conscious mind, and others just will live it because that's what they do. And if you're in the safeguards of the church, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing.
Oh yeah. Amen, brother. Well, guys, the joy of fasting, the wisdom of the Athos diet in this interview. Thank you so much, Dr. P, for coming on the show. I knew this was going to be a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. So thanks for coming on. I'll have to have you back on again.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you, Kyle. I'm an ally. I really appreciate it. I love all the work that you're doing. It's really inspiring.
Well, we love promoting Christ, and we love promoting that again, ancient Christian living, that type of lifestyle and program that produces saints. And I think much of our culture and even our churches have we get a little rusty on this. And so it's good to come back and renew this type of thinking that our forefathers and the saints and the apostles taught us. So guys, thanks for checking in. Don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to check out Dr. Pete's book, The Athos Diet. Make a purchase today. It'd be great. All right, God bless. Have a great day. Bye-bye.